Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over what causes rejection in a lot of different ways. We're going to break it up. We're going to use research to actually understand the mechanisms of rejection, the risk factors, and some of the common variables that actually make an individual feel rejection. Now, before we get into this, I did want to mention I'm planning on posting this the day before Thanksgiving. And so I wanted to wish you guys, a good holiday. I very much like cooking, and so if anyone is comfortable sharing what you guys are cooking for Thanksgiving, I would like to hear that. I'm personally gonna spend time. I'm in a long-term relationship and I'm just gonna be with just me and him. But I like to make a little bit more than just for me and him so that I can make him like leftovers, sandwiches later. And so I did want to ask you guys what you're making. Personally, for me, I'm making like just a ham for him and me, cranberry sauce, macaroni and cheese, mashed potatoes. I think I might do like a sweet potato casserole with the little marshmallows on top. He really likes that. And then I'm going to do cornbread, but I'm going to do like cornbread muffins instead. And I might do biscuits as well. I'm not sure. And I might throw another side in or two. But the main thing is we're just going to have ham. I don't really like turkey that much. And a big turkey is going to be a lot, even for leftovers. And sometimes I do chicken, but I didn't want to this year, and he would prefer ham, so I just did it like that. I'm just curious what you guys are making, and how you guys are spending the holidays. I hope that you guys will have a good Thanksgiving. So let's go ahead and talk about, first of all, the risk factors of what causes rejection, okay? So the very first risk factor is actually, to be honest, an individual who might have a high rejection sensitivity. And this can come from trauma. It can come from your own disposition. It can come from a number of factors, but this is still a risk factor. Individuals with a high risk sensitivity, they almost anxiously expect to be rejected, and they might actually more intensely react to rejection. In particular, men in general are more likely to be more uncomfortable with rejection because there's a lot of self-worth for men attached to being more dominant, which is good in some ways, right? Being more assertive, being more of a leader. And so when he's rejected by his, with his advances, sometimes it hurts him in a lot of different ways in terms of his self-esteem, his perspective of himself. So sometimes that can be part of it too. This research was done in 1996. The next research was 1995, and there are plenty. This one's just comprehensive, and I feel like it's very interesting. If anyone's interested, it's going to be in the description box, but it's about low self-esteem. And people with low self-esteem tend to interpret any sort of ambiguous social interaction or social feedback as rejection. And they may have a heightened sense of, like a heightened feeling of rejection because of that. Even something that is not necessarily rejection oriented or supposed to be that way intentionally, they might perceive it as such simply because of their perspective. Somewhere inside, they believe they deserve to be rejected, or they're always going to be rejected. That low self-esteem might actually make them feel like they're anticipating that, if that makes sense. The next one is actually that you may have a history of childhood neglect or inconsistent caregiving, which in my opinion is the same thing as neglect, just a different way of looking at it. This research was done in 2020, and what we saw is early relational trauma, typically parental caregiving roles, and inconsistent parental responses tends to lead to a heightened sense of rejection sensitivity. So this increases that sensitivity, which is the point we talked about at first, right? Or you might have a difficult time regulating your emotions when you're triggered, which can be perceived based on your rejection. Sorry, let me reword that. You might perceive rejection and you may struggle with regulating your emotions, which in fact heightens your rejection sensitivity over time, but also in that moment because you're not able to cope with it as quickly as if or not even quickly, but as streamlined as somebody who didn't have that necessary, that childhood neglect. They had a necessary balance of their caregiving. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining that correct. I'm just trying not to use too many words that are too negative or clinical, which could be triggering for folks, but also you're not allowed to say some words on YouTube, so I'm just trying to be careful. But basically, if there's a lot of neglect or you were hurt in your childhood or there was something that happened that should not have happened, you're obviously likely going to be very uncomfortable with rejection because you already feel like you've already had so much pain in your childhood. The next one is social anxiety. Social anxiety, the foundation of social anxiety is about concerns for the way others perceive you. That's a very dry, non-clinical way of looking at it. I made a video on social anxiety. It's more comprehensive because I don't want to just brush over something that a lot of people struggle with. Social anxiety basically is a part of it is a fear of how people perceive you, how you will be represented. And so therefore, the feeling of rejection is heightened because you're almost hypervigilant of these cues, okay? The next one is actually if you have a higher emotional reactivity, actually in psychology we might call it neurotic. Actually, individuals who have that, where they're more neurotic, they have a stronger negative perspective and more heightened reaction to negative variables, and they have a more negative response in correspondence to it. Okay, so they perceive something as negative and they react negatively as well instead of neutral or try and manage otherwise. And so another person who might not be as neurotic, this research was 2009, they might be able to neutralize the feeling, whereas an individual who is more neurotic for whatever reason, some of the reasons we've already talked about, they will take these interpretations that are already negative and they may make it more negative. Okay, then another risk factor, which is very common, okay? Research was done in 2007, but there are plenty. If you have past interpersonal trauma, this could be in relationships, this could be in bullying, any sort of negative experiences where you were constantly rejected time and time again, what ends up happening is any sort of new psychological pain, right? That will be amplified based on your past. Whereas another individual, perhaps they don't have that trauma or they've worked through it, but likely if they don't have it, it's going to be a lot easier for them to not take rejection as personally as somebody who's already experienced it so much, to which they may feel in their mind, logically, the issue is them, because why is something repeating so often? That's not always true, but that's that perception, okay? And the very last risk factor of individuals who may be more at risk to feeling stronger senses of rejection or even being rejected, this particular one, but more likely the feeling of rejection. Anyone who feels that they're stigmatized. This research was done in 2009. So an example that a lot of you guys bring up in the comments, I don't even know if this is a correct example, but I do see it often. A lot of men bring up their height. Like, you guys bring it up very often in the comments. I even made a video on it because it's something you guys bring up so often. I'm not a man, clearly, and I don't fully, like, I do understand, like, I want to emphasize, like, I understand that it's something that you guys deal with, but of course, I can never speak for you fully, but my understanding of it is that you guys feel like you being shorter than, I don't know, a certain height, we talked about it in the video, you feel like you're at a disadvantage and you might be stigmatized or more likely to be rejected based on that factor. And you guys have shared many of your experiences. And so I do agree that that's a reality, okay? I literally made a video on it because I was so curious. And so there is a reality on it. And so folks in that situation, they might be more accustomed to rejection for that. And for that reason, they might be more uncomfortable with rejection because they're used to it, okay? So what is a psychological process of rejection? There are some stages, and we're going to talk about it, okay? The first stage, research was done in 2003, is detection of those cues, likely those exclusion cues, like you being isolated, right? Where it's the possibility of you being isolated, okay? So humans in general can not rapidly, but many, especially if they have been rejected for a while, can easily detect these things, often within seconds based on this research. And these cues are activated, like they activate, how would I even describe it? Because I'm trying to say it in a clear way and I'm clearly not doing well on it. It's kind of like you have an alarm system in your brain, and that's kind of what activates. So that's kind of what shows up. And so the next stage is kind of the activation of the social pain system. I'm trying to word this where it's a little bit palatable. So after the alarm system, we're going to call it for this video, and your brain is kind of activated, there's a region in your brain. There's a couple regions, but we're just going to say a region for now, okay? Rejection activates those brain regions, and that's associated similarly with physical pain, actually. This research was done in 2012, which basically it shares the same network, the same neural network. Emotional and physical pain, they share the same path, but also overlap. And so a lot of times we can see that that pain center is activated. So you're probably going to start feeling pain, okay? So the first stage we were talking about is you have that alarm system that's going off. And then your brain kind of sends those pathways, and now you're feeling that social pain. It's an emotional pain, but it's similar to physical pain. And a lot of this that's why heartbreak can be so painful, right? In the next stage, we kind of call it, or I'm going to kind of call it like you reflected on your self-worth. So maybe a threat to self-worth might be a better way to put it, okay? This research was done in 2015, and basically what we saw is individuals that sense rejection and they generate that pain. Now what they start doing is that interpret that on themselves. And so what starts happening is shame comes out, anger and sadness as a part of their system being evolved to monitor what we could call social belonging, okay? And the next stage, which I think a lot of people see this happening, but I don't think they realize it's a stage that happens after other things that we were just talking about. We have behavioral responses that come out. Withdrawal, aggression. Some might even call another type people pleasing. We see that a lot. Rejection can cause both pro-social behaviors and not antisocial. I'm not saying antisocial personality disorder. I'm saying the opposite of pro-social. So not like against social responses. I don't know how to even word that, okay? So the first one is like seeking belonging, and the other one is hostility and aggression. That's a more clinical way to put it, okay? I just don't want to confuse you guys with the clinical words, okay? 1995, basically the pro-social behavior will be like people pleasing, okay? Whereas the behavior of more withdrawal, aggression, hostility might be more like withdrawal, feeling uncomfortable at a certain maybe gender, right? We see a lot of people now, they're doing these gender war things. I don't agree with that, but some people are like, oh, all women are like this, all men are like this, whatever it is. That's the aggression based on probably frequent rejection of trying to get into a relationship or something of that sort. And then the last stage, just to simplify it, this research was done in 1991, but there are more updated research, rumination and meaning making, okay? What happens is underneath and after the aggression and behavior, and this is going to kind of go in a loop sometimes, right? You try to make meaning of why. Why does rejection happen? Often you're trying to look for explanations. It helps to maintain distrust, but it also helps you to try to see if you can navigate around it. That's where the subconscious behavior is coming from, thought process. But what ends up happening is actually increased depressive symptoms actually occur, okay? So let's go on to the next part of this video, okay? What are the common things that can happen that cause people to feel rejection, okay? The very first one is social exclusion, being left out intentionally or unintentionally. Research was done in 2000. Basically, even a brief exclusion, like being left out of a game or not being invited to a wedding, can actually produce the feelings of rejection, and some people can go through all the stages that we just talked about, okay? The next one is romantic rejection or a breakup, okay? Romantic rejection, we were just talking about it. It actually activates the brain circuits we were just talking about, and sometimes it can even activate some of the circuits that show up in, I don't know if I'm allowed to use this word, like if you have a use disorder, right? You have withdrawal. Yeah, I probably can say it like that. If you have a use disorder, you have withdrawal, right? In our brain, sometimes individuals may have a similar withdrawal when they have a breakup, okay? Because they're used to something continuously. Similarly to if you have a use disorder and you're using something over and over and over, right? And so, unfortunately, because of that, it makes, in combination to that physical pain pathway we were talking about, also the circuits that occur when you have a use disorder, both of those things are showing up at the same time. Rejection, breakup, romantic rejection is very intense because of that. That's why a lot of people, romantic rejection is one of the most painful forms of rejection, at least acutely, because of these reasons. 2010 was the research, okay? The next one is criticism, negative feedback, or disapproval. A lot of people feel this way. 2006, negative evaluations, even mild ones, can activate the same, that alarm system we were talking about. That can be associated with social exclusion, okay? The next one is comparison, okay? This one, a lot of people don't realize this can feel like rejection, but it is, okay? People who compare, not you guys, I'm saying like if somebody, let's say a parent compares you to your brother. Let's say your younger brother, for some reason, I don't know, he's better at sports than you for whatever reason, or your parents think he is. And now you were always compared to him. He's always better at sports. Maybe he's more talkative. Maybe you're more independent. Maybe you didn't like doing those things. Maybe you wanted to do something else with your life. Maybe he went to college. You wanted to go into trade. And so you were always compared to him. And maybe you didn't even realize it, but you felt rejected, which is why you pulled away more and more from your folks. And that's unfortunate. I'm sorry if that's what happened. It's common. I see it a lot with my patients. The next one is, like we were mentioning, ambiguous social cues, neutral facial expressions, or delayed replies. Research was done in 2001. That can make us feel like there's some sort of rejection because humans actually, all humans, disproportionately interpret ambiguous responses typically as like more negative in comparison to positive because of the fact that we are evolved to perceive any social threat, because social belonging is very important to our psychological well-being, okay? And so what happens is we do have a negative bias, and so sometimes you might interpret something neutral, especially if you have some of the risk factors we talked about it, as negative. And so any sort of these social cues can actually make you feel rejection. The next one is failure to meet perceived social norms or expectations. This one's going to be the last one, but let's touch on it before we wrap it up, okay? This is a collective feeling of rejection because in of itself, you are not just rejected, but maybe the folks that you feel more fitting towards may be rejected, okay? We were just talking about trades. A lot of people, depending on what perception, I think it's less common, but some people don't understand that going into trades can be very beneficial. You don't have a student loan or maybe as large of one, whatever it is, and you can make pretty good money and you can live for yourself, do good for yourself. And you also, I think, can be very helpful. For example, if you're plumbing, I wish I knew how to do that. It's very helpful. You have a lot of skills, a lot of skill set, whereas instead individuals who went to college, they might feel like, oh, that's different. I don't understand that. And for that reason, because they don't understand trades, they may reject that. Okay. I know that's a very silly one. It probably doesn't fit with everybody, but sometimes that can happen. I think the reason why I brought that up is because I'm studying for my PhD. And so a lot of people, I don't agree with, but a lot of people have this like elitist mentality who like have higher education, which I don't like. I don't really agree with that, but it's really common in like all the people I communicate with. So that's why that one came up. But any group that feels rejected, or you just feeling like you don't fit social norms, you might feel rejected. And those are some of the reasons of what can cause rejection, what can make you feel like you are rejected. And I am sorry for anyone that feels rejected. We all have rejection sometimes. At one point, I plan on making a video on how to kind of manage those feelings, but today we were just talking about the research because it's a little bit of a long video. But I hope this video is helpful to somebody. I hope that you guys have a good Thanksgiving. I'll see you in the next one.